Tariffs hit. Did Japan back down or strike back? Without a single headline-grabbing move, Japan quietly outmaneuvered U.S. trade pressure through strategy, speed, and scale. How did Toyota and Honda keep dominating despite new barriers? What role did Japan's government play in this silent counterstrike? And is the U.S. auto industry now facing a long-term competitive crisis? The headlines came fast and loud. The United States had just reimposed steep tariffs on vehicles imported from Mexico and Canada, and the ripple effect was immediate. But beneath that decision, one key fact was missed by many in Washington. Many of the cars being targeted weren't American at all. They were Japanese. This wasn't just a side effect of a broader trade measure. This was a direct hit on one of Japan's most strategic exports, automobiles. For decades, Japanese car makers like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda have heavily invested in North American assembly plants, particularly in Mexico. They did this not to bypass American laws, but to operate closer to one of their largest markets, reduce costs, and meet local demand more efficiently. Now, these same investments were being punished. The tariffs, pushed under renewed Trump campaign pressure and echoed by economic nationalists, aimed to restore manufacturing in the United States, but at a serious cost. According to the CNBC report published on March 19, 2025, the tariffs placed on vehicles assembled outside of the United States immediately affected Japanese automakers' supply chains. Toyota had several major manufacturing sites in Mexico, producing some of its most popular models sold in the United States. Similarly, Honda's factories in Ontario, Canada, and Mexico were crucial for their North American operations. These were not just export plants, they were a core part of the global value network. The sudden imposition of tariffs forced executives in Tokyo to reassess their operational balance. Within hours, the stock prices of Toyota and Honda dropped slightly in Tokyo trading, and automotive suppliers with deep ties to Mexico, like Denso and Aisin, began issuing cautious investor guidance. Behind closed doors, major Japanese automotive boards convened emergency strategy sessions. But the impact wasn't just financial. The tariffs sent a clear message to Japan. Washington was now willing to weaponize trade policy in ways that blurred the line between domestic politics and international cooperation. What concerned Tokyo even more was the ambiguity of the United States messaging. There was no warning, no negotiation, and no exception offered to countries that had long considered themselves close allies. For Japanese car makers, this was less about money and more about trust. And in business, especially at this level, trust is everything. Despite their initial public restraint, the reaction from automakers quickly began to take shape. Toyota issued a measured statement expressing disappointment in the lack of dialogue before the tariffs were enacted, while Nissan warned that costs could rise for consumers if the policy continued. Honda, in a rare political comment, noted that these moves undermined years of cross-border cooperation in innovation and investment. But these weren't just statements for public consumption. They were opening shots in what would soon become a much broader counter-strategy. Japanese automakers did not waste time retaliating. Instead of engaging in a war of words, they turned their attention inward, to their research labs, global logistics networks, and design floors. The primary goal was clear. If Washington wanted to make imports difficult, Tokyo would make their exports indispensable. Within weeks of the tariff announcement, Toyota fast-tracked plans for a new hybrid engine line set to be manufactured in Japan and exported globally. Honda initiated a shift in its global production schedule, reducing volumes in Mexico and Canada while expanding facilities in Southeast Asia, particularly Thailand. Nissan doubled down on its strategy to make battery-powered compact cars affordable to middle-income American buyers, delivering models that U.S. automakers were struggling to match in both price and efficiency. Crucially, these moves weren't haphazard. Japan had anticipated something like this since 2018. During the first Trump presidency, there had been hints that trade protectionism could return. That warning had already pushed Japanese firms to explore alternative production hubs, diversify supply chains, and invest more in digital automation at home. Now, they simply accelerated those plans. Meanwhile, the Japanese government closely monitored developments. The Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry began quiet consultations with major car makers, assessing the scope of impact and potential countermeasures. The mood in Tokyo was measured but firm. This wasn't the first time Japan had faced pressure from the United States over trade, but this time, the stakes were different. The global auto industry was transforming fast. Electric vehicles were no longer a futuristic concept. They were the battleground. And Japan, already several steps ahead in hybrid and battery technology, saw an opportunity to take control. According to an AER news report, Japanese companies responded to trade friction by redirecting capital toward energy-efficient and sustainable transport systems. This wasn't just greenwashing. Toyota had been working on solid-state battery research for years. Nissan's commitment to an all-electric lineup in the next decade was on track. Honda had recently partnered with General Motors to share battery development, although those talks began to lose momentum amid rising political tension. What became clear in those first few weeks after the tariffs was that Japan was not planning to back down. Instead of engaging in rhetorical retaliation, its strategy was to outperform. Their EV models were more efficient, their hybrids were more affordable, their supply chains were more agile, while U.S. automakers scrambled to lobby Congress for exemptions or subsidies. Japanese manufacturers leaned into innovation. Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia were eager to welcome Japanese automotive investment. These nations offered lower labor costs, friendlier trade terms, and growing domestic markets. As factories in Mexico began adjusting for lower output, factories in Southeast Asia ramped up hiring and procurement. Japan's pivot was swift and calculated. For Washington, the political calculus grew more complicated. The original intent of the tariffs had been to push automakers back into American territory, creating jobs and boosting domestic manufacturing. But the reality was less clean-cut. The auto supply chain is globally integrated. By punishing Japanese companies with roots in North America, the United States had inadvertently threatened thousands of jobs at local parts suppliers, dealerships, and logistics firms, many of them American. The first signs of blowback came from within the industry. In Michigan, several small suppliers voiced concern about order reductions from Japanese clients. In Texas, where Toyota has one of its major North American headquarters, local officials warned that prolonged trade friction could affect state revenue and employment. In California, electric vehicle advocates worried that limiting access to affordable hybrid models would delay the broader shift to sustainable transport. Japan wasn't playing to the press. It was playing for position. As the weeks rolled on, the bigger picture came into view. Japan's auto industry was not merely surviving the tariff wave, it was redirecting its momentum. The early signs pointed to a broader strategy already in motion, one not designed just to absorb impact but to deliver one. Japan's response wasn't about retaliation, it was about making the tariffs irrelevant. And, as time would tell, that strategy was working.